Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this the clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And thankfully, despite yesterday's video, I was saying that this election has absolutely no entertainment value whatsoever and is the most boring election that I think I've ever seen. We finally had some entertainment yesterday as I was recording. Because Nigel Farage had a surprise announcement yesterday, and the surprise announcement was that he is now standing as the Reform leader, and not only that, he is standing as an MP, and he made that all clear with a simple two-word tweet saying, "I'm back." And needless to say, there were many happy people to hear this, me included. Because Nigel Farage is basically the best person to lead a pressure group inside the United Kingdom. He got Brexit done effectively, not just by forcing a referendum out of David Cameron, but also by getting Boris Johnson into Parliament, by making it clear to the Tories that actually, yes, he will be on their side, give them a deal, and step aside where it's obvious that there is actually quite a good contest for Tories to win a seat, but in safe seats he'll still run because he knows he won't get in. And it ended up forcing Theresa May out and Boris Johnson in, and obviously eventually we got Brexit. So Nigel Farage actually has a very successful political career, despite the fact he never ended up in, well, the British Parliament. He ended up in the European Parliament a few times. Because politics is a hell of a lot more than simply just, can you get into Parliament? I'd say Dominic Cummings is very good at politics, is a very successful politician, and he never even stood as a candidate. But you don't spend 5 or 6 years making these videos and come to the realisation that actually quite a lot of people really do just have surface level takes and really don't care beyond that. Even people who are supposed to be doing this sort of thing professionally, but we'll get into that. So Farage wrote a piece for The Telegraph. Patriotic British voters now have a real alternative to this failed elite. It is time for a change. Voters understand that Starmer's Labour is just the different side of the same grubby coin to Sunak's Tories. And yes, don't worry, we'll touch on that a bit too. Britain has been failed by the two main parties that have conspired to accelerate our decline. There is not a cigarette paper between Labour and the Tories in this election. Both are hooked on a deadly addiction to mass migration. Neither has a plan to pull this country out of a deep economic hole, and frankly, neither believe in it. I believe in this nation, and I'm prepared to fight for it. That is why I have announced that I will lead Reform UK for the next 5 years and seek election as the MP for Clacton, a Brexit-voting Essex town that has a lot less than it deserves. Campaigning this weekend, I was reminded of my responsibility to the millions of decent, patriotic Brits who are sick to the back teeth with our political establishment for its policy of betrayal. The people that I meet are furious at first Labour and now the Tories' open-door approach to mass immigration, with some 2.5 million migrants entering the UK in the past 2 years alone. That's why this really is the immigration election. Which, to be honest with you, I had a bit of an issue with him calling it the immigration election while not standing, because the Reform Party were doing pretty badly in the polls. Not terribly, they were clearly having some influence and some high numbers in certain constituencies, but Richard Tice, while he was growing on me, he does not have the pull that Nigel Farage has, which is probably part of the reason he's doing this, because a lot of people were saying, look, you know, Tice is alright, to put it very nicely, but he's not you, and we're wondering why you're not standing. It just feels like your heart's not into this, and obviously on the campaign trail he's felt that actually this is his calling, and I think that's an absolutely fine thing to do. And now I think it's fair to call it the immigration election, because if Reform gets an awful lot of the popular vote but not necessarily any seats, that's a fair thing to point to and say, look, a lot of people are fed up with immigration, you deal with it properly, you'll get the votes. And Labour aren't going to do it, so it's up to the Tories to actually do something about it, but too little too late for them this election, so our best choice might be Reform. There is also a deep anger that public services from healthcare to housing are disintegrating, even as record peacetime taxes are levied on pitiful, stagnant wages. And there is utter despondency among the electorate that neither Labour nor Tories can put forward a plan, let alone a leader, that offers just a shred of hope that things might improve. When media types tell me that a vote for Reform is a wasted one, I am first baffled by their arrogance and then remind them that while Labour has already won this election, the role of official opposition is up for grabs. There is no doubt that I have taken a big risk in giving up the life I enjoy to work for a vision of Britain so hated by our wrong-headed elites. But the state of the nation has left me with no choice. Moreover, I am confident of overturning this ragged Tory party to then take the fight to all those that deny Britain a bright future as a self-governing, prosperous country. While the stakes are high, there is a path to meaningful power for common-sense political party like Reform. The referendum of 2016 was won on a bedrock of working-class patriotic support built up by UKIP under my leadership, which in the general election just a year before had taken more votes off Labour than the Tories. In 2019, I pointed out those voters in Boris Johnson's direction, handing him a huge majority. He then proceeded to bungle. Again, absolutely none of this article is untrue. This is all true as far as I can tell. This is why Nigel Farage has an awful lot of support, because he is just honest about the situation. It's not good. The Tories and Labour, that's obviously mainly the Tories, have been screwing it all up for the past decade and a half. Labour's plans to fight them have always been, do what they're doing, but even harder to the left wing. And a lot of people are not a fan of that. Really, where do the right wing go? Reform seems to be the best option. Because how are you supposed to trust the Tories? And honestly, we'll get into it, but it appears that even their promises clearly cannot be kept. But the millions of voters looking for an alternative should know that there will be no reprieve from the Tories this time. My friend Richard Tice has got Reform polling impressively in the polls, and now is the moment for us to go hell for leather, releasing our potential to become a force in Westminster. Reform's agenda for the country is based on this belief that the purpose of power is to best serve British citizens. Where Labour and Tories stand for mass immigration, Reform would freeze non-essential migration to reverse long-standing wage depression, which again the Bank of England agrees happens, and save Britain's public services from the burden of unlimited demand. Where the Labour establishment stands for high taxes and high spending on their pet projects, Reform understands that British taxpayers know best how to spend their money. Where media institutions run by the chattering classes put down this country and its history at every opportunity, I will never apologise for championing Britain and putting its people first. It is time for a change. Voters understand that Starmer's Labour is just a different side of the same grubby coin to Sunak's Tories. The electorate must be given the confidence that a viable alternative exists. I want to lead a revolt against the political establishment, and I'm asking you to join me by voting Reform on July 4. Say what you will about Farage, but he knows how to write a good and inspiring speech, and this is definitely one of them. Now, I don't agree necessarily that Starmer and Sunak are two sides of the same grubby coin. They're both bad. However, when it comes to the Tories, they at least do have factions in there that want to fight the culture war properly, whereas it's just quite painfully obvious that Labour are trying to chase votes. They know that they can't keep being woke, they know it doesn't work, they know it's a London-centric thing. But when they come to power, you can trust that they will then actually do things that are the opposite and push on an open door. At least with the Tories, they do actually have a history of trying to fight against it and just not doing very well. I trust Reform a lot more because they have conviction in this sort of thing. Having said all that, from the perspective of Farage and an awful lot of people who are going to vote for him, they may as well be the same side of the grubby coin, because while I have just played a bit of apologia for the Tories, they're not very good at actually fighting back against the woke Borg, and again, we'll slowly go into that over this video because, well, there's a lot to get through, because it's amazing how much can happen in 12 hours. And I do mean that because, as I say, in my video yesterday, this is the most boring election known to man. And then if you look at the screen, I mean, I can't play the music, unfortunately, because it's Eminem, but Nigel's digital marketing team clearly have their finger on the pulse. This is what brings energy to an election. And especially now we've unfortunately moved toward more presidential style elections, because effectively Sunak does not have the backing of his own party and so kind of has to go in as a presidential style election. We're seeing people, me included by the way, saying, yeah, I'm probably going to spoil my ballot or really reluctantly vote Tory, now come out and say, I'll actually have a look at Reform now. I think they could be pretty good. And if nothing else, the vehicle to stick two fingers up to any sort of political establishment in Britain and Europe is to vote for Nigel Farage. It's exactly what my parents did as well 5 years ago in 2019, when nobody trusted the Tories, and so for the European election said, right, I'm giving you 2 fingers until you get Boris Johnson in and he actually does what we want, which is get Brexit done. And even if he doesn't win a seat, as I say, the popular vote going massively up for reform will show that, yes, people want less immigration. And it's just become a lot less risky to call it the immigration election because, as I say, I think Farage is going to do pretty well. And I'm not the only person that thinks that, because absolutely every follow-back pro-Europe account on the website is now trying to pull out all the big guns to discredit Farage. And for some reason, their best arguments are he gets annoyed at journalists, which is no surprise, because this is how they act.
Call it a pressure group, call it a party. You're a candidate to be an MP on a ballot paper in an election.
Mate. How many times have you stood?
How many times have you stood?
What do you know about it? How many times have you stood?
I'm asking you the question, Mr. Farage.
So the context here isn't actually that obvious from the Twitter clip that has been obviously cut down, but the BBC journalist is once again going on about and trying to imply that actually Farage is a failed politician because he's never actually got into Parliament despite standing twice. And part of his argument for that was, well, the first time it was just as a pressure group, the second time it was actually in earnest. But he actually lost the seat, he says in the speech, I don't know the details on it exactly, that effectively the Tories cheated, some people went to jail over it, and absolutely no recount was done. Again, don't know how true that is, but that's the argument, and instead of focusing on whether that's true or not, which honestly, this is the part that implies to me it was true, the BBC say, oh, well, you're a failed politician, really, aren't you? And Nigel Farage keeps having to explain to these people that report on politics for a living that they do not understand how politics works. And this is actually one of the biggest issues that we have with journalists at the moment. They are supposed to be the conduit to get information to the general public, and they are so bad at it that it misinforms the general public to the point where they think it's actually a dunk to say, you've never been to Parliament, though, have you? Or won a seat in Parliament, I should say, as if that's anything to do with success and failure in politics. It's an aspect of it, sure, but the man's been an MEP for decades, and again, got to the biggest vote in Britain for decades, and actually won it.
I mean, the challenge here is people will say, look, you've tried it before,
well, I tell you
what, didn't manage to do it. What makes this time any different?
Ask something intelligent and we'll carry on with the conversation, shall we?
I'm interested in why people should trust you that 7 times previously you didn't manage to do that.
No.
You also...
I think you're very, very boring, and I think your viewers will find you very boring, and you ought to do rather better as the state broadcaster, in my view.
I mean, honestly, more people need to treat journalists with this contempt. It's why in my last video I was such a fan of Kemi Badenoch. She was asked a stupid question. She says, you're asking me a stupid question. Please ask me something better. We need more interactions with journalists like this, because all they're trying to do is catch you out. All this journalist was trying to do was annoy Farage, and yeah, it worked, but it doesn't make him come off as an intelligent journalist. It makes him come off as, well, someone who doesn't have anything interesting to say. And then this morning there was a clip on the Today programme, which, as you will know from yesterday's video, seems to be absolutely chock full of people who are idiots. Because this is their reaction to hearing the fact that there are streets in Oldham when nobody on the street can actually speak English.
I could take you to streets in Oldham right now where no one speaks English.
Or they could be speaking 2 languages, couldn't they? Don't your children speak another language?
No one speaks English.
Yeah, but they might know English as a second language. No. Farage's point is that literally no one on the street speaks English. Or maybe you have the odd person in the street that does speak English as a second language, but overwhelmingly you feel like you're in a foreign country, which is the whole point. People in Oldham generally don't want to feel like that they have stepped into a completely different country when they go down particular streets. How do I know this? I know people from Oldham.
Children speak another language. How do you know? How do you know they're not speaking another language?
Because I've been there, and the Guardian have even reported it.
I mean, it gets you to the very bottom of this issue. What the BBC journalist is trying to say is actually, oh no, they're well integrated. They speak English. They just speak a different language when on that particular street with their particular people. And Farage's point is obviously, no, they're segregating themselves, and in segregating themselves, language is a big barrier to that. And yeah, the Guardian did actually report on this sort of thing. So Theresa May declared, we need to live our lives not as a series of separated, segregated communities, but as one truly united kingdom. But in places like Oldham, acting on such sentiments represents a daunting challenge. Residents speak of their shock as recent events and express a cautious optimism that much has changed. But there is also the sense that efforts to improve community relations in Britain's most divided towns remain a work in progress, along with some worries about the future impact of cuts. You can never be complacent. It's something you have to work at all the time, said Alan Francis, principal of Oldham College, which lost one of its tutors in the Manchester bombing. Again, this was 6 years ago, this article. Francis, whose college has long been the forefront of efforts to improve community cohesion, stressed the common desire by families of all backgrounds to make the most of new opportunities. There is also local pride in initiatives, including major strategic investment by the council. But Ted Cantle, the author of the Home Office Commission report into community cohesion following the 2001 riots, told The Observer that Oldham remained one of Britain's most segregated towns. Official attempts to foster integration across the region where some of the rioting took place has been lukewarm at best and probably non-existent at worst. So to make this absolutely clear to the BBC, yes, there is still a massive issue when it comes to integration of some communities, and a big barrier to that is the fact that they will not be speaking English, because English is the inviting language of this country. And I really don't think it's a bad thing to say. If you live in England, you should probably be making an effort to actually speak English most of the time. It does this crazy thing of helping aid integration.
Well, and you think those people you might hear speaking another language might have no English at all? Do your children speak another language?
I wouldn't comment on that.
Okay, but I think they do, because I think your
wouldn't comment
your
on that. I don't talk about my children.
Okay, but
and if you do, I think that's pretty poor form. Very poor
perhaps we
form.
can agree that speaking
Unsurprising,
more
but
than
very poor form.
one language is perhaps a good thing.
Again, you've got to say that Farage is a hell of a man of integrity to never bring his children up in conversations. Just the politics and the private are two separate things. I am not bringing my children up on my campaign trail because there's absolutely no need to. Now, speaking multiple languages, yes, I agree, it is probably a good thing. It's completely moot to Nigel Farage's point. You are in England, and if you manage to find streets where absolutely nobody speaks English in general, not necessarily that they can't understand it or can't speak it, but that they don't, as a rule in general, speak it in public on the streets, then yes, that is a bit of a problem. Because as Carl said in his speech from the other day, that is simply colonialisation. And it's got to a point where we have ended up putting up tube signs in London in completely different languages. It is the sign of a colony, and it is something that the people of Britain have consistently, for decades, been voting against. Anyway, other followback pro-Europeaners, especially the larger of the political activists in those circles, decided to make their own Twitter videos commenting on the fact that Farage was back, and again, they're afraid. We should all be cheering about that.
I enjoyed the Farage announcement today. There was something about it I liked, and I shouldn't, by rights, like Farage having the prospect of coming into the UK Parliament or being more prominent in UK politics.
I mean, for now he sounds overconfident, but you will soon see that it turns into the crying Sojak behind the smug mask, because these people don't know how to react any other way. So go on, let us know why you've got a spring in your step.
And I've worked out now what it is, and that is the comeuppance that comes with it, both for the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, but more for the Conservative Party, because this notion that the main parties, and that I guess extends to Lib Dems, can avoid the topic of Brexit and move on is so very wrong.
Yeah, this is definitely crying man behind the smug mask. To a lot of FBP ears, Nigel Farage is Brexit man. However, because they literally can't get their mind off Brexit, they think the same is true of Farage. Farage will only bring up Brexit to say, we've done it before. We've completely upended the plan of the elites to take us into an integrated Europe, and so we can do it again for completely different subjects. Nobody wants to go back to Brexit. The argument's been done, and if you try and overturn Brexit, you will obviously see some people flocking toward that, like Mike Goldsworthy here. But an awful lot of people will say, no, we had that vote, we need that implemented, this is the way we go from now. And you never know, in a couple of years or so, after it's been a decade, you might start seeing the opposite happen of people saying, okay, it's time to change our minds now. But honestly, you want to make it a Brexit debate, there's obviously no question that we should not be going back into Europe. The economic argument alone would be decimated by the Brexit side because we're doing better than the Eurozone. Farage's whole point at the moment is that we're still doing better than the Eurozone, so thank God we're out, but we could be doing a hell of a lot better because look at other countries in the world like America. So it's quite amazing that the FBP ears see Mr. Brexit man, Mr. Farage, and use this as an opportunity to bring up Brexit again. It's just so predictable.
And they were all hoping to do this in this election. Avoid the elephant in the room. We can have something else to talk about, and we don't need to address this issue again.
Yes, correct. That's why nobody is talking about it apart from you. It's quite amazing that Mike Goldsworthy decided to stop being a scientist to try and make sure that Brexit, well, at first doesn't get done, but then also gets reversed. And now this is his entire job. His entire job is just to grift to get Brexit reversed. He has absolutely nothing of interest to say, but he does try and make a funny comparison here.
But it is like feeding a wolf red meat over years and years and years, and the wolf grows bigger, and then you think you can feed it a little bit less red meat and walk away, and it won't come after you. Well, with Farage's announcement now, the wolf has come after them, and it's come after the whole party, saying, where's more meat? I want more. This isn't enough. I'm not satisfied. You've betrayed me. And the wolf is big now because you've been feeding it for a long time.
I just love it. Mike Goldsworthy's whole point. You see, Nigel Farage, it's all Nigel Farage wanting red meat that caused all this. We live in a democracy, you absolute buffoon. The referendum was probably the most direct democratic vote you could possibly come up with. And even then, the unclear plan of Brexit was chosen over the clear plan of stay within the EU. You're just not going to go back. It's not going to happen. And to say Farage has got bigger because you got it red meat, no, Farage's popularity increased every time you didn't give him red meat. Farage stopped being involved in politics once Brexit was done because he thought he was finished. He thought, I don't have to do anything else. Everything else should work out. You got Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage in office. I gave them the deal to actually implement a decent Brexit, and they tried, and then COVID hit, and then there was a big issue with Dominic Cummings having to deal with the media, and the pressure became too much for the Tory party. Things changed, and wouldn't you know it, Nigel Farage wasn't getting what he wanted and what he promised his voters. That is why he has come back, because actually he is starving. He is starving for decent policy and actual control when it comes to British borders, and also crime and taxation and public spending. He's not getting what he wants. He is starving. That's why he's coming back, you absolute moron. He goes on for about 2 more minutes, but I just can't be bothered with it anymore. His basic thesis is completely wrong. There's no point carrying on. I just hope this isn't a meme of the miner stopping right before something great happens and you find diamonds in the rough, but oh well, it's a risk I'm willing to take. But naturally, other left-wing elites are simply there just to try and smear Nigel Farage over and over. Brendan Cox, husband of the tragically murdered Joe Cox, said Trump is a pound shop Trump. Trump is a pound shop Trump. Farage is a pound shop Trump. He'll sow division and aim to inflame tensions. Again, the division is already within Britain. Farage has actually done very little to inflame them. A reminder to broadcasters that Reform is polling level with the Lib Dems, has no MPs, okay, and at best is looking to win a couple of seats. He should be treated as such. Don't let the tail wag the dog. And these are just all pathetic attempts to try and push Nigel Farage out of mainstream debates. It's just a pathetic attempt to shut down opposing voices, people they don't like, and they don't appear to have learned that actually going forward like this doesn't particularly work. Because, number one, the mainstream media don't have a choice but to be impartial. That's Ofcom's rules. And from what I can tell, post-Brexit, people seem to understand that actually, if you do just try and shut down the opposition, that doesn't stop them voting when it comes to the voting booth. And these elites just simply haven't realised that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the real reason they haven't realised that is because they simply have never had a proper conversation with someone they disagree with. They've always either just shut them down or walked away from it. And it leads you to stupid conclusions like the one Brendan Cox just gave us. Anyway, it appears that Farage coming back actually is one of the best things that could happen if you want a proper reconstruction of the Tory party. Because according to Politics UK, Tory aides have admitted that the party is finished now that Nigel Farage is standing as an MP, and expect defections to Reform UK very soon. And I have no doubt that there will be more defections over to Reform UK. Even before Nigel Farage stood, you had Tory MPs already moving over to Reform. And Nigel Farage coming into play, and polls will naturally go up because of this. You'll probably see more Tories with the confidence to actually say, Tories aren't it anymore, I'll move over to Reform. Especially if they've never been ministers and they are backbenchers. I mean, again, you had Lee Anderson to be one of the first people to go over to Reform. There will be more. There simply will be, because they seem to be the best choice for the Red Wall. And I'm not being funny, but it also looks like Nigel Farage will actually get into Parliament. Because a poll was conducted on the same day Nigel Farage announced that he was leader for the Reform Party, and said that he was going to be standing in the constituency of Clacton. And it looks like that Reform actually has a good chance of improving their odds there. Obviously, we've got a few weeks left, and this poll will have been conducted before Farage actually announced he was standing in Clacton. But Conservatives had lost 40% of their vote share. They lost 40% of it. They were at 72% here, because the people of Clacton really wanted Brexit done. And it just goes to show how badly they fumbled the frankly huge majority and cakewalk into Parliament, that now Farage has had to come back, and even before he announces that he is standing there is already massive popularity with Reform. They are already on level with Labour. And let's not forget that Reform will probably take some of the Labour votes. They probably will, because an awful lot of Labour voters are actually quite to the right of MPs when it comes to things like culture. And if there is anyone to the right on culture, it is Nigel Farage. And finally, when this happens, we can finally have journalists stop saying, oh, well, you failed as an MP before. Like, yeah, good point, I guess. He stood twice. Of course, let's forget the fact he stood as an MEP for decades within the European Parliament. Let's just forget about that part. He's a failed politician, don't you know? God, I really do hate journalists. Anyway, you can tell that this announcement really has rustled up the jimmies of leftists, as they really are on the campaign trail to try and convince Clacton, which is quite clearly a Brexit stronghold, to not vote for the man that gave them Brexit. Live in Clacton want to vote for the very antithesis of Nigel Farage. Natasha Osborne recently completed a PhD in government at the University of Essex, focused on social justice. Do you really think that's the type of person that the people of Clacton, who overwhelmingly voted for Brexit and Boris Johnson, want as their MP? And a statement's even worse. I've recently completed a PhD in government at the University of Essex, where my research focused on matters of social justice. Again, we've already seen that, just cringe. As your Green Party candidate, lol, I am deeply committed to developing and implementing the policies that are necessary for us to avert the impending climate crisis and to ensure a just and fair society for all. I will also support a change to the way our voting system works in England and move to proportional representation. Well, she's in agreement with Farage there. I believe that this reformation of the voting system is needed so that the election of our government is more democratic. So she's in agreement with Farage there anyway, so not the antithesis. Honestly, if this is your plan, don't vote Farage, vote Green instead. Just, no wonder the left deserve to keep losing. Anyway, speaking of the left keep losing, after this announcement, it turns out that Tory leadership is actually starting putting out panic policies. Ones that have implications that are actually very, very bad for them, and ones that, if Nigel Farage is smart, will jump on to keep making his point that you can't trust Tories. Sunak may harden stance on Human Rights Pact after Farage jumps into race. Policy blitz have failed to move polls in Conservatives' favour, shifting UK's position on Rights Pact would anger centrists, but who cares? Sunak is considering hardening his Conservative Party's position on the ECHR as disastrous polling and Brexit architect Nigel Farage's decision to stand for Reform UK in the general election leave the Premier's ruling party facing a potential wipeout. Senior Tory party officials have sounded out ministers on the more moderate wing of the party over whether they could support a tougher stance on Britain's membership of the Human Rights Pact, according to people familiar with the matter who asked not to be named, discussing policy that's not finalised. Now, the kind of thing you have to think about here is, well, What is the main reason we've not been able to send people to Rwanda yet? Human Rights Act in the UK and European Convention of Human Rights are the two main pieces of law that are constantly cited as, well, this is why we can't do it. And if they're saying they're hardening the stance on it, that kind of implies that they're not actually ready to send people off to Rwanda again, despite that being one of the biggest policies that they have. And despite all the promises Sunak makes of, oh, we'll send them by the next general election, which, okay, called it early, let's be fair there. But he also says, oh, they'll be sent off within July. This is kind of implying that actually, no, they're not ready for it. They are still discussing what they are actually going to do about the conventions and acts that actually stop them from doing it. So, as I say, hopefully Farage will jump on this, because if nothing else, even if Reform don't get a seat, it will actually harden Conservatives to the right, which is effectively what I have always thought right-wing pressure groups and parties are supposed to do. So hopefully he takes advantage of it. Oh, and it gets worse, by the way. There is disagreement among cabinet ministers over how hard to go. Some Conservative advisers are calling for Sunak to commit to working with European partners to reform the convention. Fine. Or failing that, leave it. Good. Other Tories have previously called for a referendum on Britain's membership for the ECHR. Many on the moderate side of the party, including several cabinet ministers, oppose leaving the body. The Conservatives are searching for game-changing policies after they failed to shrink the wide poll lead enjoyed by Starmer's opposition Labour parties in the first 12 days of the campaign. YouGov modelling on Monday showed Labour heading for a 194-seat majority in the House of Commons, with Tories losing more than 200 seats, and as I say, completely deserved. But you really don't want news coming out about this. You want to seem more than anything united, and the fact that so many Tories just don't know what to do about the ECHR really is showing that they have no idea what they're doing. If they could just agree on, right, can we try and work with European partners to reform the convention, or can we leave it? Having that position will probably be fine, but there are many Tory MPs and ministers who simply do not ever want to leave the ECHR because it might look bad. And if that's what they're worried about, then they don't deserve to be in a seat in Parliament. And that's not the only policy they have. Tories vow annual cap on visas in general election pledge to reduce immigration. Sunak unveils policy long demanded by Tory hardliners such as Suella Braverman, as challenger Farage insists 4 July ballot is an immigration election. So at least the Tories are taking that seriously, but the problem is that Labour don't need to take it seriously because they're doing so well, and so saying it's the immigration election, having Labour win it, might give leftists the opportunity to say, well, you said it was the immigration election, and people voted for more immigration, therefore infinity migrants. You're just kind of risking shooting yourself in the foot with it, but I understand why he's going down this line so hard, and as I say, it's probably better he's actually running as a candidate, and can argue that if he actually does get a seat in Parliament this time round, he can say, well, I was voted in based on immigration, therefore we should have less of it. Amazingly, this plan is absolutely moronic, though. The plan would see the government ask its Migration Advisory Committee to provide a recommendation for level of the annual visa cap, which ministers will then consider before putting the proposals to Parliament for a vote. The committee's remit will be explicit that our objective is to get migration down to sustainable levels, for levels to fall year on year over the next Parliament, and that they must consider both the costs and benefits of migration, the Tories said. So, a huge issue that Liz Truss and Dominic Cummings have put forward consistently for Liz Truss the past few weeks, I suppose, but Dominic Cummings for the last few years, is that quangos and governmental departments that have absolutely no influence from the public are setting all these targets, are stopping the government from implementing policy, or, an open door for bad policy and things like that. They are going to give the power, yet again, to a quango, to another unelected body. They are outsourcing, again, the responsibility, which has been the issue with Parliament for the past few decades. It's not the government are going to do something, it's the government are going to outsource their responsibility once again. Obviously, for a while I've been saying I'll probably reluctantly vote Tory, but now that Farage is back and now that I'm seeing that their policy plans are just outsource responsibility again, why would I even consider them? Why would I do it? We'll have to see how polls go and how it will look like locally to me and which Tories defect to reform and all that, but realistically I can't see things going well for the Tories, both on a normie level and on a level of analysis that I go into. And on the subject of completely useless Tories, an excellent microcosm of the type of Tory MPs that have been absolutely useless, even if they have been correct on some things like Brexit, have just decidedly come out of this election effectively saying, yeah, I probably shouldn't have ever been an MP. This was BBC's Newsnight programme last night, talking with Conservative Denna Davison. And my God, should she have some quotes that we need to go through.
But let me ask you, why two young women, one for the Conservatives, one for the SNP, are quitting at such a young age?
I think that phrase, claiming my life back, I think is probably where I sit. I mean, I've loved the job in many ways, but I didn't get elected quite as young as you were, but my entire 20s were dominated by politics, either trying to get elected, helping run elections, or being in Westminster.
Yeah, politics is a really, really hard job. You know, for a while I've thought, should I get into politics or not? And honestly, a big reason I'm put off it is because it's an awful lot of hard work and does take over your life. And I'm not necessarily in a position where I can even justify having my life taken over by that. But realistically, you want people in politics that are willing to do that work, but don't particularly want to, because you can trust that they are actually there for the right reasons. Because you want someone there who is understanding that they are running a country that is going to be a difficult job, and if they don't have that mindset from day one, they're probably not going to do a good job. And this is why I trust Nigel Farage, by the way. Because he was umming and ahhing about it, that speaks volumes to me that he understands how difficult the job is. He has a realistic understanding of it, which means he will take it seriously.
And it was, for me, it was a sort of, I don't want to say existential crisis, that sounds very millennial and dramatic, but just looking ahead to, I'm about to turn 30, do I want my 30s to be the same as my 20s, or do I want to be able to spend that time with my loved ones, give them the attention and support that they've given me?
Now, all that is absolutely fine. I can understand having your 20s dominated by politics, coming up to 30 and thinking, you know, I'm probably not going to win the next election anyway. Let's actually focus on my family now. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, but this is where it gets a bit worse.
But what's wrong with the job?
It's a hard job. I mean, but you go into it eyes wide open.
That's not a reason for giving up.
Again, it's absolutely fine to say the job was too hard, but that's probably something you should be saying kind of while you're in the job. But I mean, obviously, you're going to be sticking to a job that pays you £85,000 a year and pays for all your expenses. But Maria Black in that clip also says that she doesn't think that Westminster is a healthy working environment, and Davison agrees. You're running a country with 66 million people in it. Of course it's not an easy job. Of course the working environment's not going to be healthy. You are there to debate and vote for policy to run a country. You know, I imagine, yeah, that is pretty difficult. I imagine, yeah, that's probably not the healthiest working environment, but that's why you get paid so much for it. And the implication that, oh, maybe we should make it easier, it is a frankly pathetic way to end your political career. And neither of these people will be missed from Parliament. But my God, when they move on to the culture war topic, it gets way worse.
As a young Conservative woman, do you welcome what Kemi Badenoch was saying?
I don't at all. I think, regrettably, the debate around trans issues right now seems to be used as some kind of political football for this mythical culture war that the Conservative Party seems to be fighting.
She's a left-winger. That's it. The Tory Party have got to stop selecting these people. Davison is one of the big reasons, and obviously MPs like her, that people don't trust the Tories, because they keep letting this entryism in. Oh, this mythical culture war. The 2019 election, a large part of the reason voted for Boris Johnson is because he was anti-woke, if you will. He was attacked by left-wing culture warriors. That is part of the reason people liked him, because he didn't take any guff from it. And he actually loved Britain. And part of loving Britain is genuinely trying to have a reasonable approach to debates like this. And when people are saying trans women are women, yeah, that is kind of offensive to Brits, because it is so staggeringly and obviously wrong.
I don't know why we're fighting it. I don't know who we're fighting specifically, and particularly in an election where most people's minds are on cost of living, pound in their pocket, the state of public services. I don't know why this is something that we even need to be focusing on at all.
Immigration is the number 2 issue when it comes to voters. You are fighting left-wingers who want infinity migrants. Yes, it is not really anyone in particular. It is a whole group of people that include absolute nobodies in the university and the Students' Union, all the way to the top of the Labour Party. It is a fight that is at the core of it asking, should Britain even really exist? Because if we're having trouble even accepting that men and women exist, then yeah, asking whether a country should exist is kind of easy pickings. And obviously, conversations like that are always so decentralised that it is kind of hard to point at someone and say that's who we're fighting. But I think it's pretty clear to say that we are fighting the Labour Party and a whole bunch of left-wing activists. You know, you can be pretty safe that you're going to be quite accurate with pointing at that and saying that is our enemy in the culture war.
And when I think about, what I consider to be the proudest achievements of the Conservatives being in office since 2010, same-sex marriage, I think, for me, was a real turning point. It's a thing that really cemented my place in the Conservative Party, because it showed where a party of tolerance, a much more modern party, and a party that isn't afraid to do something that might frustrate its own base sometimes, but because it's the right thing to do.
The Tory party lost a third of its membership after the gay marriage thing, by the way, and still a decade later it's pretty much the only thing that they can say in the past decade and a half that they've done that they are proud of. And again, part of the reason she's saying, who are we fighting, is because she doesn't realise that actually it's people like you that we are fighting because of exactly this. But also, I imagine part of the reason that Davison is so in favour of gay marriage is because she's one of these women who came out as bisexual after separating from her husband, but as far as I'm aware, hasn't actually been in an openly lesbian relationship. Again, it's another pin in the points that a lot of bisexual women aren't actually bisexual.
And it feels to me like the rhetoric around not just trans issues, but LGBT issues more broadly is so toxic. There's so much heat in the debate, and I think it's dangerous.
And I mean, what? Do we just take their points sitting down? Do we not make counter-arguments? Why are we fighting this? Because people care. People give a damn. People don't want to live in the radical progressive world that left-wingers keep pushing for and that you apparently are happy to live in. If you're happy with that, fine. Don't be part of the Tory party. The whole point is that the Tory party are right-wing, and you're not helping with that. Anyway, there is one more clip of Farage, but I will leave that to the very end. For now, it's obviously shilling time. I have 5 members on this channel now. I'm really happy about that. If you want to be a member too, please see the links below and donate anything you can. Obviously, you don't have to, but it does help keep the channel going. I am on 4 streams this week, amazingly. Tonight, we've got Tosh Talks. We are talking about Generation Z and whether they are incompetent, lazy, or whether they get a bad rap. Wednesday, it's Regional Variations, Fun Untailed Features channel. See me there. It's the 150th Proper Horror Show stream on Thursday, which I will be on. We will be talking about the American film made in 1987, I believe, called The Lost Boys. And finally, on Friday, it will be Laughing at the Guardian. The main guest there will be Don the Pleb, and we'll be talking, obviously, an awful lot about America, but also an awful lot about Britain. So with that, that's absolutely everything I had for you today, apart from, obviously, the Nigel Farage clip. But for now, I would like to say thank you very much for watching, and please do enjoy the Nigel Farage clip.
I can't let down those millions of people. I simply can't do it. It'd be wrong. So I have decided I've changed my mind. So I am going to stand in this election. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow. So I'm coming back as leader of Reform UK, but not just for this election campaign. I'm coming back for the next 5 years. What I'm really calling for, and what I intend to lead, is a political revolt. Nothing in this country works anymore. The health service doesn't work. The roads don't work. None of our public services are up to scratch. This will only be turned around with boldness. And we are going to be the voice of opposition. And I tell you what, I've done it before. I'll do it again. I'll surprise everybody. Thank you.